For those of you who are new to the park, first let's say that there are 5 general areas, plus one that's accessed through the adjacent companion park in Canada called Waterton Lakes National Park. The Park Service website created a trail map for each of these 5 areas. These maps include data that can be confusing and, well, frankly, a little hard to figure out. But the website also lists distance and elevation gain information below the map. On the map itself, the trails are listed at the top of each map, along with the net elevation gain, which can be a bit misleading, so I'll help fill in the gaps as we go along. So first, here's a brief overview of each area. Let's start with the Lake McDonald area. This is where most people enter the park, and it can be a bit crowded. The base elevation here is the lowest in the park, and most trails are well below the 6,000 to 6,900 foot tree line. So they're shaded, which is handy on hot days. Massive fires in 2017 and 2018 burned about 30,000 acres in this area. The mini Glacier map covers trails in the northeast part of the park, which is my favorite. There are flat trails with great views, strenuous hikes with great views, and my favorite trail, which ends at a glacier. The North Fork and Goat Haunt map extend to the Canadian border. The North Fork area has many remote finger lakes, which are accessed via rough gravel roads. Goat Haunt can only be accessed from a trail or through Canada. The St. Mary map includes trails along the east side of the Sun Road and Logan Pass. Here you'll find easy access to waterfalls near the Sun Road, hikes to high mountain passes, and popular trails at Logan Pass. Two Medicine is in the southeast part of the park. From the time the park opened in 1910 until the Going to the Sun Road was completed in 1932, most park visitors arrive by train in the nearby town of East Glacier. Today, Two Medicine is less crowded than the other areas of the park, which is kind of odd because it has some amazing trails. The bulge above the border is the adjacent companion park in Canada called Waterton Lakes National Park. Together, they are the first international peace park. A few of Glacier's trails can be accessed through Waterton Lakes. And there are also some really nice hikes up here, including its famous, because it's so incredible, Crypt Lake Trail. Unfortunately, Parks Canada doesn't provide a decent map of the trails in their park. Their website does list the trails, but does little else. And by the way, in 2019, much of the park was closed due to the previous year's forest fires, and Goat Haunt was unmanned due to lack of funding. So before you come, check with the website for the latest info. While these maps are handy when you're planning your trip, my favorite trail maps are available at the front desk of the park's lodges and inns. They have a map on one side and a description with distance and elevation gain information on the back. These are very handy. Since most people come from the west side of the park, I'm going to start with the Lake McDonald area. One of the most popular trails in the park is the Trail of the Cedars. It's one of 2 wheelchair-accessible trails in the park. It's located 5.5 miles east of the Lake McDonald Lodge. It's very popular, and it's often not possible to park near the trailhead. So if you really want to see this one, get there early. The trail is a raised wooden boardwalk, arranged in a mile-long loop through an old-growth cedar and western hemlock forest. The cedars reach heights of 100 feet, and the big ones are said to be over 500 years old. By the way, here it's just about 3,500 feet above sea level. This trail has more than just big trees. The undergrowth is also on the lush side. This side of the park is lower and much wetter than the east side. After only a few minutes, the sounds of the forest give way to the sound of rushing water. Avalanche Creek cut this beautiful gorge. This is one of the park's best photo ops, and it's the primary reason I've done this trail many times. You can shoot it from a couple of vantage points and get some really good shots. If you feel the need to add a little more up to your day, meaning elevation gain, just after the bridge, there's another trail that heads up along the creek. You can see it just beyond the bridge in this shot. 1.9 mostly paved miles from here, and another 500 feet up. You'll arrive at Avalanche Lake. It's nice, but I've only been up to Avalanche Lake once, and frankly, I don't really feel the need to do it again. There are better sights to come. That's just my opinion. This area also has hikes to high peaks. Away from the Sun Road, there's a hike with a great view of Lake McDonald. From the Apgar Lookout, If you've been to the park's website, there's a webcam at this spot. It's a strenuous hike, though it's only a 7.2-mile round trip, because it rises about 1,850 feet. There's little shade, and it's frequented by bears, so bring your bear spray. It'll take most folks about 3 hours to get to the top, where you'll see that familiar view from the webcam. It's to the left of the lookout tower. One of the best trails in this area is the amazing 12.3-mile round-trip hike to Sperry Chalet. And you can do it by horse, on a group ride. On foot, the trail is tough, and you need to be in shape to hike up 3,360 feet. A fire in 2018 burned one of the historic buildings, and its reconstruction is scheduled to be complete at the end of 2019. The burned trees also mean there is less shade here, so this one is a toughie. But the views make it worth all the effort. And once you get here, there's actually quite a bit to do. Look at the website and check it all out. A couple of other trails intersect with this one of the toughest trails in the park. The one to Mount Brown Lookout goes up 4,250 feet in just 5 miles. And of course, that's why I've never done it. The hike to Snyder Lake is an 8.7-mile round trip with only 2,045 feet of climbing. But I haven't done this one either. The Johns Lake Trail is only a 1.8-mile loop, but there's not much parking there, so this one can be kind of hard to do. And yes, it goes by the nearby falls, which are very photogenic. But I slipped and fell, and, well, the 2 cameras I was carrying survived intact, but one of my ribs didn't. It still hurts sometimes, so let's move on. There are many more trails in the Lake McDonald area, and maybe I'll talk about them in an update of this video. But frankly, I prefer the east side trails. Now take out your St. Mary and Logan Pass map. I'm going to start at the 6,647-foot Logan Pass. It's at the top of the Going to the Sun Road. For many, this is the highlight of their Glacier trip, so the parking lot fills up early. Consider taking a hiker shuttle or red bus to get here. This is a great place to sightsee. The valley views are incredible, and there's often wildlife. And the weather can change at any moment. Of course, there's also a visitor center and a gift shop. But for we hikers, the best thing about being here is the trails. One of the most popular hikes in the park is the Hidden Lake Nature Trail. This 2.7-mile round trip begins on the paved path behind the visitor center. It quickly changes to a raised boardwalk to stay above the snow, which often doesn't melt until late summer. The trail is in an open alpine meadow, which wildlife frequent. I've seen goats, marmots, alpine squirrels, bighorn sheep, and even a grizzly or two. And don't be too surprised if the trail is closed because of too much bear activity. The trail gains a modest 540 feet by the time you reach the Hidden Lake Overlook. And weather can play a big role in how nice it looks. When I did it, well, it only looked okay. This is what it looks like on a nice sunny day. And for those who are interested, it's another mile and 800 or so feet of down to get to the lake. This hike is not on my top 10 list, but if you're not ready for a long hike, this may be the one for you. This is the Garden Wall, and one of my favorite trails is carved into it. The Highline Trail. I've taken 3 different day hikes from this trailhead. Another one will take you all the way to Canada, as this is part of the Continental Divide Trail. The Lunch Spot hike is only about 4 miles round trip. It's about 11.5 miles to the Loop route. And if you include a steep spur trail to Grinnell Glacier Overlook, then you can add a couple of miles. Though this is called the Loop route, the trail isn't a loop. It requires a hiker shuttle to get back to Logan Pass. My favorite hike from this trailhead is the 15.2-mile route to Swift Current via Swift Current Pass. And yes, I'll talk about how to get back to Logan Pass a bit later. The trailhead is across the street from the Logan Pass sign. I'm going to talk about the shortest version of this hike first. It's a hike out to what I call my lunch spot. There isn't really any official name for it, that's just what I call it. And for those who are interested, this hike is covered in great detail in my Hikers National Park video. The trail starts with a short meander, and then takes a dramatic turn onto a shelf that is carved into the garden wall. And no, it's not really that scary. This is a must-see part of the trail. And remember, you can turn back at any time. You're only on this little shelf for about 5 minutes. Then you're crossing on an alpine meadow, and you're going through a few groves of trees.
Hey, bear.
Where, by the way, it's a good idea to make some noise before entering them. My lunch spot is about 2 miles out, and I've got to say they're probably my favorite 2 miles. The cliff, the views, the wildlife, it's all incredible. Just after this grove, the trail is on another shelf, and above the trail there's a little carved-out bench. This is my favorite lunch spot. It's right across from the haystack formation, and there's a great view of Heaven's Peak. Even with stops along the way, it only takes about an hour to get here. And it's pretty flat, so it's not too difficult. I've done this version of the trail many more times than I've done the others because, well, the others are hard, and they require quite a bit of time and a physical commitment. I tend to ask passers-by if they've seen anything interesting. Some don't have much to say. But this couple saw a bear chasing a goat in the next meadow. A quarter mile away, I captured a grizzly, and briefly her kids. Boy, am I glad I bought the 600mm lens. This is an incredible spot, and sometimes, well, it moves me to say incredibly sappy things to the camera, but I'm not going to bore you with that. A jaunt to my lunch spot and back only takes 2 to 3 hours, and they are amazing hours. The route to Granite Chalet goes up a switchback over the haystack. The chalet and Logan Pass are at about the same altitude, but the trail goes up and down between the two, so it's hard to guess the total elevation gain. I've heard estimates in the range of 795 feet, so let's use that one. Except for this 300-footish switchback, the trail is gradual enough that you never really notice the grade. The top of the haystack is at about 7,300 feet, and it has some great views. After that, the trail clings to a ridge, and there are some great views along the way, including the one of Granite Park. Just before the 7-mile point, there's a signpost and a trail that goes straight up 900 feet in just 9/10 of a mile. I did this spur trail when I did the loop trail. It's a soul-crunching slog that seems never to end. But when it does, you're on top of the Continental Divide at about 7,500 feet. And yes, we've been on that monster trail. I didn't spend much time up there as I breathlessly looked down at Salamander and Grinnell Glaciers. And frankly, I was too tired to take any more pictures. This was not an easy spur trail. Granite Park is a small compound. You can stay in hostel-style rooms if you're lucky enough to get reservations. But you need to bring your own sleeping bag. There are 12 guest rooms with 2 to 6 beds each. There's no power, but there is propane for cooking. There's a little camp store that's open for everyone. Remarkably, horses bring the items up here so you can buy a snack and get something else to drink. And by the way, you'll pack out whatever you buy. From Granite Park, there's another spur trail. This one goes to the Swift Current Lookout. To complete the loop trail, go down 2,300 feet through a recent burn area to the loop on the Going to the Sun Road. And I wish I had hiking poles when I did it. Going down is pretty rough on the joints. By the time you get here from Logan Pass, you've covered about 11.8 miles. But if you went up to the overlook, you've covered 13.6 miles and gone up 1,800 feet and gone down about 3,300 feet. And oddly, the loop trail is not a loop. A free hiker shuttle can get you back to Logan Pass. But make sure you get down here before the last run of the day. And of course, you can start here and go up to Granite Chalet. From here, it's an 8.4-mile hike with about 2,300 feet of up and then down. From Granite Park to the Swift Current Motor Inn, there are about 6.6 miles on the Swift Current Pass Trail. The first mile or so includes about 200 to 300 feet of up. But after that is one of my favorite views in the park. This is Swift Current Valley. It's a view that is earned in sweat. I've done it twice and I really hope to do it again. The valley floor is about 2,300 feet below, and the view from the valley is quite nice. I describe it in detail in my Bullhead Lake hike in the Many Glacier segment. The hike from Logan Pass to Swift Current is one of my favorites. If you're in good shape, I highly recommend it. If you're not, Remember that rescue is hours away. Now that you know what Logan Pass has to offer, it's time to look at some easy hikes on the St. Mary map. There are many places to stop along the Going to the Sun Road, and Sunriff Gorge is one of them. And of course, it has limited parking. But there is a shuttle stop here. There's a trailhead near Sunriff Gorge that connects to a few short trails that lead to 3 waterfalls. One goes all the way to Gunsight Pass. Much of this area burned in 2015, drastically changing the view. This Google Maps view shows the extent of the burn area. Of course, in the years to come, these dead strands of trees will become excellent fuel in an inevitable dry year to come. The gorge is on the north side of the road. The trail to the falls drops below the road on the south side. Following the signs is important here, because you want to make sure you end up where you started. Bering Falls is just about a third of a mile away. The trail drops about 250 feet along a tree-lined creek. It's a nice waterfall, especially on a hot day. But I like to do hikes like these on cloudy days so that the water doesn't get overexposed when I'm taking pictures. The second fall is just about 1.5 miles down the trail. It's less than a mile from its own trailhead. This is St. Mary Falls. Its 2 tiers can look quite different depending on how much water is flowing over them. There's a nice view from the bridge. A couple of 100 yards further is a large cascade. As a photographer, this is my favorite feature of the trail, as there are several interesting places to put the tripod. Less than a mile later, you're at Virginia Falls. It's 86 feet tall, and a nice way to end the hike. Of course, you have to hike back too, but you know what I mean. The hike back is pretty easy, except for the 250-foot climb up to the Sun Road. But there are a couple of routes back to the road, and they end up in different places. I took the wrong path, so when I got up to the road, my car wasn't there. I had a feeling it was to the right, and 15 or so minutes later, I found my car. From Sunriff Gorge, you can also join the Sun Point Nature Trail, which follows the St. Mary Lake shoreline. But there's another way to walk this nature trail, and it's even shorter, and it has much more parking. The trailhead is near the St. Mary Boat Dock. It's a short 1.4 miles out and back, with lovely views of the lake and surrounding mountains. This is a short, flat walk that just about anyone can handle. Early in the morning, wildlife like to come here to get a drink, so you never know what you might see. One time I saw this sign near the parking lot. I've never seen a mountain lion, and frankly I don't want to, especially since I often hike alone, which of course is a very bad idea. One of the longer hikes on the St. Mary map is the 12.4 mile round-trip hike to Gunsight Lake. It has only about 500 feet of down and then up. But if you want to add another 6 miles and another 1,700 feet of up, you can take it all the way to Gunsight Pass. You can get to it from the Falls Trail I just showed you, but it's a bit shorter from the Jackson Glacier overlook. The beginning of the trail goes down through the trees about 500 feet, and I was glad I had bear spray. Eventually, the trail opens up on one side and there's a view of Jackson Glacier. There's also a little spur trail leading to Florence Falls. Unfortunately, I didn't know this spur trail even existed at the time, so I didn't take it. But you won't have that problem. The bridge and the falls are clearly the highlight of this trail. Without them, this trail is not on my to-do list. I've only done it once, and frankly, I don't plan on doing it again. It's a lot of work for only an okay view of the lake. But that's just my opinion. And if I had been there on a day when the weather was really interesting, I might feel completely differently. Now, I've never been up to Gunsight Pass or Jackson Glacier, but I've heard the glacier is quite interesting. Maybe one day. From Jackson Glacier Overlook, there's another trail on the opposite side of the road. It connects to the Piegan Pass Trail. But if you drive west on the Sun Road to Saya Bend, you'll find another parking lot and a trail for Piegan Pass and Saya Pass. Many say that these are some of the best hikes in the park. Piegan Pass is a 9-mile round trip, while gaining only 1,750 feet. It tops out at about 76 or so 100 feet. Saya Bend is about the same length, but it's 300 feet higher. It might be the highest peak in the park. After following the creek for a bit, the trail goes through dense forest. I've seen bear skid on the trail, so again, carrying bear spray is a good idea. After a little more than a mile, the trail hits a T. This is where we meet the trail from the Jackson Glacier Overlook. We want to go to the left. You'll cross a creek or two, but your feet should stay dry. There's another trail junction. To the right is the splendid Saya Pass. At this point, the trees are kind of thinning out, and soon there's an open scree field, and there's quite a slope. There's a great view of Jackson Glacier to the south. There's also a nice view of Piegan Glacier. It's the only glacier in the park that has not shrunk significantly in the last 80 years or so. And while you're crossing the scree field, don't be surprised if you feel a bit strange. The reference points are so far away and the slope is so severe that, well, frankly, I felt a little vertigo-ish. Of course, that might have been my sinus infection too, but anyway, it's kind of interesting. From here, it's only a few more minutes to the pass. It's a nice place to stop and rest and just kind of take in the view. And for me, it was quite quiet. I only saw 2 or 3 other hikers when I was here. And you can hike from here all the way down to Many Glacier, but that's not for me. I stopped and took in the view at the saddle just above a small lake before heading back down. It was rather nice up there. From here, you can take a trail all the way to Many Glacier. Well, that's about all I have to say about the trails on the St. Mary map. I think you'll agree that there are some spectacular trails here, and some of them are on my must-do list. They provide access to amazing viewpoints, high mountain passes, and roaring waterfalls. And it's hard to do them all in one trip, and that's why I keep coming back. Okay, now I'm going to show you my favorite part of the park, Many Glacier. To me, it's the most scenic. It's also where my favorite trails begin. I only hope that this video won't make it more crowded than it already is. There are many trailheads in the area, and each has multiple destinations. This one traverses the Swift Current Valley while passing by a chain of lakes. This one goes to the popular Iceberg Lake and the Tarbingen Tunnel. And there are shorter trails off the Many Glacier Road. And my favorite trail in the park begins at this crowded trailhead near Swift Current Lake. Also, there are some unofficial trails, they're really unmarked routes, to the top of the surrounding mountains. If some in your group aren't into hiking, Many Glacier is one of the places where they can take a horse on a trail ride. I'm a flatlander, and on my first day in the park, I plan to do an easier, flattish trail to help me get used to the 4,800-foot altitude. The Bullhead Lake Trail, or a portion of the 8-mile round trip, is usually my first choice when staying on the east side of the park. When you're this close to the Continental Divide, you assume that the best hikes involve a lot of going up and down. Well, the Bullhead Lake Trail proves that this is not necessarily the case. This is also one of my favorite trails. The trailhead is near the west end of the Swift Current Motor Inn parking lot. Like many of the other park's trailheads, you can take it to one of several amazing destinations, depending on how far you want to go. This one goes all the way up the Swift Current Pass, where it connects to the Highline Trail, which of course is a part of the Continental Divide Trail. So you can go from here to Logan Pass, Canada, or even Mexico. But Bullhead Lake is just a 7.2-mile round trip. And again, it's relatively flat with only a few hundred feet of up and down, again depending on who you want to believe. The trail passes a chain of lakes. The nearby first lake is full of moose nearly every evening. The second has a colorful small waterfall, and the final one, Bullhead Lake, is in a beautiful terminal valley. The first is Fisher Cap Lake. That's the one with the moose. It's accessed via an unmarked spur trail that's just about a quarter mile from the parking lot. And this spur trail is easy to miss, and I've missed it many times. But this is the best place in the park to see moose. They feed in the water nearly every evening, and they do draw a crowd. I tend to make the photo op at this lake its own activity. I don't really come here when I'm going all the way to Bullhead Lake, but I'll talk more about that in a second. During the day, the moose are often in the nearby woods, so keep alert and actively listen, because moose, as well as bears, feed during the day. So don't wear earbuds. And if you look closely, somewhere back there, there's a moose. Of course, it's easier for them to use the trail, so guess what? They do. The woods are pretty thick until you reach the west end of Fisher Cap Lake. And then the views get even better. One of the great things about Glacier is all the color. This red rock looks great under that blue sky. You reach the second lake about 1.5 miles from the trailhead. This one is Red Rock Lake. You may also hear the sound of rushing water, because about 3/10 of a mile later, there's another spur trail, and this one leads to Red Rock Falls. This cascade is a nice little place to scramble around, and kids love it. It's another 1.8 miles to Bullhead Lake and the terminal valley that surrounds it. And the geology, well, it's amazing. Just look at the folds in that cliff. And I've seen mountain goats on there, and up this ridge I've even seen grizzly. Luckily they were heading up and not down to the valley. This trail feels flat, and the 420-foot rise is very gradual. So it's really more like a stroll. It's only about 4 miles out, so it takes less than 1.5 hours to get here. And there's even a flat rock that makes a great bench to help you take it all in. This trail is on my must-do list. So on your first day in the park, especially if you're staying in Mini Glacier, consider doing this trail, perhaps all the way to Bullhead Lake. By the way, the short stroll to see the moose in Fisher Cap Lake is a great way to spend just an hour or so at the end of the day, as long as you're back before the sun gets too low. Another trailhead that leads to a few interesting places is located on the north edge of the Swift Current parking lot. This one goes to Tarbingen Falls, which is a 5-mile round trip, Iceberg Lake, which is about 9.4 miles up and back. Tarbingen Tunnel is 10.4 miles away and has about 1,900 feet of going up. And from here you can also hike all the way up to the Canadian border, past Elizabeth Lake, through the Belly River to Canada. If you're going to go that far, visit the enjoyyourparks.com website for more info. This is on the same ridge as Alton Peak, and it is frequently closed by bear activity. So if this trail is open today, well, it may not be tomorrow. If it's open, you have to do it. You may have to schedule around the availability of this hike. Only about a dozen cars can fit in the nearby parking area, so you may have to park at the Motor Inn and add a couple of blocks to your hike. The trail starts with a short climb above most of the trees, so there's nice views for the first 1.5 miles. Then you enter the trees. This, by the way, that's Bear Scat, and he's likely to be still around. On one of my hikes to Iceberg Lake, there was a bear on the trail. Here's an excerpt from that video. Why were they heading this way so rapidly? Some were nervously smiling, but nobody would stop their retreat to tell me. Soon I joined the retreat. Eventually, I did learn that a mama bear and 2 cubs were also using the trail. One hiker took these pictures and some video with a little point-and-shoot camera. Usually, bears will try to avoid humans. These blocked the trail and headed towards them. They got quite close. This is potentially a very dangerous situation. They were very lucky. The mama was only interested in teaching her kids how to find and eat berries. I and others had bear spray, but none of us wanted to have to use it. After several minutes of backtracking, we saw another group coming. The lady in orange is a trail tour guide, leading a group from the Boston area. We all felt that she knew best how to handle the situation. Then someone came up and said he saw the bears leave the trail and go up the hill. So we decided we could continue, but we did so as one large group. There is safety in numbers. Secretly, I'm sure all of us were checking out the others in the group, trying to determine who was the slowest, while at the same time hoping that an old joke wouldn't come true. 15 minutes later, in a clearing, one hiker showed us her photos of the bear. She was quite close to it. I've seen what happens when a bear attacks, on this very trail, and it's not pretty. The victim I saw in 1994 struggled down the trail, covered in blood. This witness explains what he saw.
I saw him. He has a deep laceration on the top of his head, one across the chest, one on the back.
It would have taken the victim 3 or 4 hours to get to the nearest hospital by car, and by then it might be too late. So a helicopter was called. In the next week, he had to endure 4 operations, but he did survive. Youthful enthusiasm can be nothing more than naivete. This time, we were lucky, but the danger was real, and the trail was again closed the next day. So the bear danger is real, and you need to learn basic bear safety and actually use it. The Tarbongan Falls aren't really that much to look at, but there's a clearing near them and it's a nice place to rest and maybe have a snack. And not long after you cross the bridge, there's a junction for the Ptarmigan Tunnel Trail. And I'll talk about this trail after I finish talking about the Iceberg Lake Trail. From the junction, it's about 2.1 miles to the lake. A mile from the bridge, you're out of the trees again, and the view of the valley and the Continental Divide is awfully nice. The trail gains a total of 1,250 feet, and except for the first climb above the trees, it does so gradually. This trail feels more like a stroll than a workout. Well, this is Iceberg Lake. It's in a nice cirque with a 3,000-foot cliff face. This was shot in September and the lake was free of ice. It'll look differently every time you hike here. This is another one of those hikes it's either on my must-do list or on my second tier, because generally it's a pretty good one. But now I'm going to talk about a much tougher hike up to the Ptarmigan Tunnel. It starts out just like the other ones did, climb up the little hill and go to Ptarmigan Falls, and the junction is just past the falls after you cross that little bridge. It starts with a half-mile slog up 400 feet through the trees and huckleberries, which of course is a favorite bear, so make noise. Then the trail climbs more gradually until a clearing with a lake. And by the way, see that little hole? Apparently a bear dug that. From the lake, there's also an intimidating view of the switchbacks up to the tunnel. The trail goes up another 500 feet in about 2/3 of a mile. Because of the weather, well, my view wasn't that great. Well, here's what it looks like on a nicer day. This is the door to the 250-foot tunnel. This is the impressive view on the other side. Because of the weather, I brought my cheap camera on this hike, and boy, I wish I didn't. Because the weather made this hike one of my most memorable. By the way, that's Elizabeth Lake below, where there's a backcountry campground. The trail continues past the lake all the way to Canada. I was really glad that I was prepared for any type of weather, because you got to remember that there's no cell coverage up here. And the weather up here, well, it can change in minutes. And that's what happened. But before it did, I took one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken in the park. This one's on my wall. But a minute later, the view was gone. A cold front brought fog to this side. On the other side of the tunnel, the clouds were really impressive. And then it started to sleet, making the 5+ mile hike down to my Swift Current cabin. It was interesting and one of my favorite hikes that I've ever done. What a great day. The Ptarmigan Tunnel hike is 10.7 miles with 2,300 feet of up. It's hard and you'll need to be in great shape to do it, but the reward is a great experience. Just a bit east of the turn to the Mini Glacier Hotel, there's a short trail with a view of the valley. It's called the Abercrombie Falls Trail. It's only 1.7 miles round trip, and it gains just 625 to 700 feet, depending on who you believe. And all of it is in the last half mile or so that's a bit of a workout. I've only done this once, and I think it was in 1999 or so I don't really have any good footage. And I remember that the view of the surrounding valley was pretty interesting. And as usual, a couple of other trails do connect here. And one of the kids who worked in the Swift Current Motor Inn told me about a way to get to the top of Alton Peak and its amazing view. It's a bit of a scramble and you kind of have to find your way up, but this is the general route. And keep in mind again that this is on the ridge where bears love to congregate, so sometimes the entire ridge is closed to hikers. There's also a super secret way to climb Mount Grinnell. I've talked to someone who's done it, and he said the views from the hotel are incredible. I wish I had pictures to show you, but, well, I just don't. And on the way to the top of Mount Grinnell, there's also an old mine. There's also a way to bushwhack your way up to the peak over the back of the Mini Glacier Hotel. The only way I know how to do these peaks is with a guide or with one of the kids who work in the park. They have lots of time off, and many of them spend their time doing amazing hikes like these. Now I'm going to talk about my favorite trailhead, which is also the most crowded. It's located on the road between the Mini Glacier Hotel and the Swift Current Motor Inn. You can go to 4 to 5 places from here, and as you can see, there isn't much parking, so it fills up quickly. And if you have to walk here from the hotel or from the Motor Inn, you can add some distance to your day. There are trails here for every fitness level. The first few hundred yards or so is even wheelchair accessible. From here you can hike the Swift Current Nature Trail, the Grinnell Lake Trail, which includes Hidden Falls, and you can go on to Fork Pass. But you can also do my favorite hike in the park, the Grinnell Glacier Trail. The Swift Current Lake Nature Trail is a 2.7-mile loop around the lake. If parking's an issue, you can start this one at the Mini Glacier Hotel. Just follow the shoreline until you see the trail, which is just a few feet from the water. But it's never a good idea to hike at night in bear country. If you like flat trails, from here you can take the 6.8-mile round trip to Grinnell Lake. If that's too far for you and you still want to see Grinnell Lake, you can buy a ticket for a boat tour. Then only about 2 miles of walking is involved. And you can still take the short spur trail to Hidden Falls. If you'd like to gain some altitude, after the lake it's just a few more miles up to Fork Pass. But this view comes with a price. There's a 1,750-foot elevation gain. When you're in the mood for a hike that doesn't have a lot of climbing, the Grinnell Lake Trail is a good choice. For the first 2 miles or so, this is also the trail to Grinnell Glacier. From the trailhead, it's just under 3.5 miles to the lake. And there is little elevation gain, so it's more of a walk than a hike. If you take a boat tour from the hotel, well, then you'll only cover about 2 miles on foot. But we're at the trailhead, and the trail is mostly in trees. And by now you know what that means. Make noise. The first bit of the trail is paved to accommodate wheelchairs. Soon after the pavement stops, you'll cross a bridge and head towards the shore of Swift Current Lake. Somewhere near this part of the lake, there's a beaver dam. The boat drivers always point it out, but frankly, I've never seen it. The trail winds around the lake to the opposite boat dock. There's a 0.2-mile strip of land between the Swift Current boat dock and the dock on Lake Josephine. This little strip has a bit of upslope, but it's really the only climb on the way to Grinnell Lake. This is Lake Josephine. It's one of my favorite photo ops in the park, especially when the boat is at the dock. In the morning, Mount Gould and the lake is sunlit, and it's very pretty. The trail continues down the right side of the lake, with a great view of Mount Gould. There are fewer trees, so it's more open, and the sun, well, it might beat down on you. You'll see plenty of berries in this section, and remember that where there's berries, there will also be bears.
Hey, bear.
I've done this trail over 20 times, and I've never seen a bear on it. But I do follow bear safety procedures. I make noise. One day on the return leg from Grinnell Glacier, some fellow hikers asked me if I knew that I had just walked right under a bear.
Hey, bear.
And I said no, I had no idea. Apparently because
Hey,
I
bear.
was making noise, and I did not surprise the bear, well, it left me alone. I could have been lucky, or maybe it's because I knew the rules. When you're a bit past halfway to the end of the lake, there's a fork in the trail. We want to go left to Grinnell Lake. The right trail heads up to Grinnell Glacier, which I'm going to show you next. From the great photo op, it's about 1.3 miles to the end of Lake Josephine. This is where the boat tour stops, and a couple of trails connect here. You can even walk back to the hotel on this side of the lake. But no matter where you're going, double check the signs. Once I was a bit cocky and I didn't do this.
It's pretty easy.
And, well, I took the wrong trail and ended up adding a few miles to my hike that day.
So you need to look at it.
But anyway, when you get on the correct trail, it's less than a tree-lined mile to another luxurious pit toilet, and the short spur trail to Hidden Falls, and another pretty good photo op. From here, it's another short walk through the trees till you cross a bridge over a creek, and then it's just a bit further to the lake. It's quite a nice view, and the colors, well, they're really nice. The waterfall at the far end of the valley is meltwater from Grinnell Glacier, and I'll take you there in a bit. This group of hikers on the far slope, they're heading up there. And if you're at the lake and you're feeling pretty good and maybe you want to hike a little bit more, well, based on the park's map, it's about 2.8 miles further down the trail, with another 500 feet of up, to Morning Eagle Falls. And if you're still feeling good, then you can go even further and gain another 1,250 feet up to Piegan Pass. Now that's a full day. By the way, I got the Piegan Pass from the Sun Road, which is a bit easier. When heading back, remember that you don't have to go the same way that you came. I always have, but you don't have to. If you're staying at the Mini Glacier Hotel, well, there is a trail that goes along the back side of the lake. There's also a parallel horse trail, which you might want to avoid because of their droppings. So if I could just sum up the Grinnell Lake Trail, it's a moderate hike, mostly through the trees, and it's not too hard because it's almost entirely flat. So if you're in need of an easier hiking day, this trail's a pretty good choice. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my favorite trail. I've done it many times. The Grinnell Glacier Trail. You can head up here from this same trailhead to make it a 10.6-mile hike that goes up 1,600 feet. And that's if you're just going up to the overlook. If you want to go down to the foot of the glacier, you'll have to add about a mile or so. And there's some up and down involved there too. But you can save yourself about 3 miles of walking by booking a seat in advance on the boat. Tickets must be bought at least a day in advance, and it is often sold out. But I think it's worth it. I tend to take this hike as early as possible in the morning. And on this August morning, there was frost on the dock. This group was led by a ranger, so I followed her to make sure I'd get on the right trail. From the dock, the trail heads back to the ridge I showed earlier. At the junction, follow the sign to the Glacier Trail. After a short jog, it goes up rather quickly, providing a nice view of the bridge we just crossed. And yes, I did my best to avoid commenting on that jacket. From here, the trail is pretty straight and mostly exposed, but there are a few groves of trees as you constantly climb. I suppose I should have mentioned this before, but there are regular boat tours, but once a day there's a boat specifically for the ranger-led hike, and that's what I took this time. It has a quicker ride across the lake, and the ranger frequently stops to allow the group to rest as she provides info that is usually kind of interesting. This little talk was on geology. Notice the bending rock and the unique color? She explains how this formed. As the trail rises, the view keeps getting better. There's a few viewpoints with amazing views of Grinnell Lake. Now, lighting and weather has a great deal to do with the quality of the photos you get from this spot, but on this day it was pretty good. I'm going to let a few of these beautiful shots play on by as I talk a bit about the weather. When hiking in Glacier, just about any kind of weather is possible, regardless of how the day started. An hour after leaving the frost on the deck, I had my jacket off and the sun was, well, almost too much. And on the east side of the park, it can be quite windy. The air generally comes from the west and it hits the divide and then it just pours down the other side. I've been on this trail when the wind was blowing well over 20 miles an hour and it gets a little blustery. And often it's a cold wind too. Of course, it's colder as you go up, and it makes sense that it's cold near the glacier, too. So dressing in layers is a good idea when hiking in Glacier. It can also rain unexpectedly. So I'm almost always wearing Gore-Tex hiking shoes, or boots. And I always bring one of those extremely portable little ponchos that cost a few dollars. That is, of course, unless I'm wearing Gore-Tex pants and a jacket. Okay, now back to the trail. After an hour and a half or so, there's a bit of a bend, and then there's a little meadow. I think it's about here that the trail dips a bit, and you have to regain some of that hard-earned elevation. Then, less than a half a mile from the top, there's a clearing with benches and, well, even a pit toilet. It's a sheltered spot, so this is a good place to eat out of the wind. It's also a good place to rest, because the hardest and steepest part of the trail is yet to come. The last quarter mile or so is quite steep, but it has great views of the valley below. Finally, after 2 to 3 hours of hiking, you're at the Grinnell Glacier Overlook. It's about 2/3 of a mile to the glacier, and in places it's a bit of a scramble, but it's well worth it. Keep in mind that it may not be safe to walk on the glacier. When I first came here in the mid-90s, you could explore ice caves, and up to the early 2000s, rangers led groups out on the ice. Today, that's not really possible. The ice is too thin, and it's quite likely that it won't hold your weight. And you don't want to fall through a crevasse, because that water is very cold. Like I said, this is my favorite trail. and I hope you can see why. My 90-minute glacier travel guide includes an 11-minute segment just on this trail, and it's well worth a look. By the way, if you want to stay here, you might want to check out my Glacier, the Hikers National Park video. It has a detailed segment on lodging in Many Glacier. Some of you may be wondering why I didn't talk about Cracker Lake yet. Well, that's because it's covered in manure. Cracker Lake just might be the prettiest and bluest lake in the park, and it's well worth a visit. But it's also used by horses every day. And since I usually visit at the end of the season, well, it's a bit fragrant by then. If you don't mind paying the fee, the trail ride is a nice option, though. In addition to the beautiful lake, there's also an old copper mine there. Around the year 1900, about 600 miners built a town where Lake Sherburne sits today. They were digging for copper that was never found. If you don't mind the smell, I gotta say, Cracker Lake should be on your list. It's really in a great location, and there's plenty of things to explore once you're there. There's even a couple of campsites. In the last few years, Glacier has become quite crowded. Many of the comments of my other Glacier videos mention how the crowds, traffic, and lack of parking negatively impact the experience of visiting the park. And crowds are why I rarely visit in midsummer, so I get it. The obvious solution is to go where the crowds ain't. And for now, that means you might want to check out Two Medicine. It's located in the southeast corner of the park, with a base elevation of just under 5,200 feet. Ironically, this remote corner was once the park's epicenter. Before the Sun Road was built, well-heeled adventurous visitors came to the park by train at East Glacier, and after a stay in Glacier Park Lodge, they would ride a horse the 11 or so miles to Two Medicine, and then beyond. Today, Two Med is a bit away from the more popular areas, so fewer people come here. That makes this a great place to hike incredible trails away from massive crowds and congestion. And many say it has the best high trails in the park. Most of the area's trails and activities are centered around Two Medicine Lake, which is not to be confused with Upper or Lower Two Medicine Lakes. There isn't a hotel here, but there is a campground and a general store with basic meal options. The trailheads are spread out, but most are near the lake. Some are best accessed via boat. As you can see from the trail information on the map, there are several short, flattish hikes, as well as some high, long monsters. On one of my first visits to the park, I hiked to Scenic Point. It's a 6.2-mile round trip that rises over 2,300 feet. It follows the Mount Henry Trail, which goes all the way to Glacier Park Lodge. It's also part of the Continental Divide Trail. Most of the elevation is gained on 16 steep switchbacks. And boy, I wish I had a good picture of them. For some reason, I was more interested in the strangely beautiful trees. They were killed by some kind of blight years ago. There is little shade on this trail, so on a hot, sunny day, you'll feel it when stopping to catch your breath, and you will need to. There's a nice view of Two Medicine Lake, but at the top, there's a commanding view of the plains to the east. There isn't a higher piece of ground from here all the way to New England. And the view, well, it goes out for many, many miles. For me, one of the most memorable parts of the trail was the hike down. The switchbacks are so steep that I was almost running down them. Slowing down enough to take a turn at a switchback or two was quite difficult, and I certainly didn't have time to take any pictures. If I were to do this trail again, I'd definitely use hiking poles. Sometimes after a few days of tough hiking, it's nice to take an easy one, especially if it's cold and rainy. On such a day, I decided to go to Twin Falls. It's 3.8 miles from the campground, but only about a mile when you take a boat across the lake. No matter how you get there, there's only about 75 feet of elevation gain. I bought my ticket on this 40-degree day, and it was a pleasant ride across the calm lake. Just about all of this trail is heavily in the trees. There are a couple of trail junctions, so follow the signs to make sure you go to the right place. This is the falls. Or is it these are the falls? Anyway, there they are. They're not spectacular, but it's not a bad way to spend part of a rainy afternoon. The more interesting thing was one of the guys I recognized from the boat decided to take a dip in the near freezing water. While waiting in the shelter for the boat to return, I asked him why he did it. So you're the guy who jumps in all the lakes in the park? Yeah.
I swam in the one at Mini Glacier Hotel yesterday.
And why do you do such a thing?
There's no showers in the park.
That's not true. The bigger campgrounds, like the ones at Swift Current, they have showers. From the boat drop-off point, you can go to other places too. No Name Lake is less than 3 miles away, but there is about 800 feet of climbing involved. And on the way, if it's not too cloudy, there's an interesting rock formation called Pumpelly Pillar. No Name Lake feels remarkably remote for such a short hike. It has a couple of backcountry campsites too, which can be reserved at the Two Medicine Ranger Station. Another destination you can go to from the boat dock is the Upper Two Medicine Lake. It's accessed from another connecting trail, and it's just slightly farther away at 2.2 miles. There's backcountry camping there too. Two of the most spectacular passes in the area can also be accessed from this boat dock. Dawson Pass and, I can't pronounce that, so you'll just have to read it, can each be accessed from this trailhead. If you don't use the boat, it's just under 7 miles to each pass. Or you can combine them in a 16.9-mile loop trail with a net elevation gain of 2,450 feet. But the views up here are really nice. Most people take 2 days to do the 17-ish mile loop. And I'm not an expert on overnight trips, so if you want to do this, go to the hikingglacier.com website for more info. Before you get to the main parking area, there's a short trail that's good for the whole family. Running Eagle Falls. The trailhead is on the main road, just after you cross the bridge. It's just a 0.3-mile stroll to a nice little waterfall. And there's one more trail I think that's worth mentioning, and it's called Cobalt Lake. This can be an over 11-mile round trip, but there's only 1,400 feet of elevation gain. And on the way, you might want to stop by Rockwell Falls. It's one of the nicer falls in the area. So to sum up, Two Medicine is a little out of the way, and it has some great high country trails and several waterfalls. It's less likely to be as crowded as some of the other areas, but it's a good idea to check out a ranger station for the current road status and parking status in Two Medicine before you drive the 60 to 90 minutes to get here from Mini Glacier, St. Mary, or West Glacier. By the way, the drive on the east side of the park is quite nice. It's twisty with a great view of the plains. And in a couple of spots, your cell phone may even work, and that's pretty rare in Glacier. Okay, now pull out your North Fork and Goat Haunt map. The North Fork area features many tree-lined lakes, Polebridge Mercantile, and remote trails to mountain peaks. I haven't been to Logging or Quartz Lakes because I've heard that the main reason to go there is because the Bowman and Kintla Lake parking lots are full. There are 2 roads that get up this way, one on either side of the Flathead River. The Camas and outside North Fork roads are paved all the way to Polebridge. The inside North Fork Road is the shortest way to Logging Lake and Quartz Lake, but it's unpaved. You can also get to these lakes from Polebridge by heading south. If you like walking in trees near a creek, then the Logging Lake Trail might be for you. It's a 9-mile round trip. The lake continues, and there are several campgrounds and more for those multi-day hikers. By the time you get to the lake, you've gained about 450 feet from the 3,300 or so foot base. Okay, now let's talk about Quartz Lake. From the inside road, the trail is about a 20-mile round trip, and that's too much for a day hike. But you can also get to Quartz Lake from Bowman Lake. You get to Bowman Lake from Polebridge, so you can take the North Fork Road that is paved. After Polebridge, the road is unpaved, narrow, and rough. You'll cover the 6 miles only at about 15 miles an hour. And if a car comes the other way, well, you're going to have to pull off to the side. Once you're at the Bowman Lake parking lot, which also, by the way, fills up often, there are several trails to choose from, including the 12.8-mile loop to 3 hikes, including the picturesque Quartz Lake. Around here, the trails spend a lot of time in trees. Into Quartz Lake, it goes up and down over 2,500 feet. So you'll need to be in shape to enjoy the remoteness of this trail. From Bowman Lake, there's another hike that's even higher. You can hike up 3,000 feet to Numa Lookout. This trail is 11.2 miles out and back. but it provides a great view of the area. There's also a more moderate hike to Akaokaala Lake, if that's how you pronounce it. It's only 11.6 very remote miles, and it goes up just 1,500 feet. So if you like the remoteness, that one might be for you. The last lake in this area is Kintla Lake. The road from Polebridge to Kintla Lake is another rough one. It'll take about 40 minutes to travel just 15.7 miles. But this is another beautiful lake. The trail follows the shoreline, and it's basically flat. I ran into a big pile of bear scat once I got here, and, well, frankly, I turned back. Took it as a bad omen. Others take it 29 miles all the way to Goat Haunt, camping along the way. Goat Haunt is at the southern end of Waterton Lake, and most people don't hike there. It's about a 4-hour drive from Apgar. There is a border crossing, and by the way, you're not allowed to bring most bear spray into Canada. I learned this the hard way. And there is a fee to enter Waterton Lakes National Park. The best photo op in Waterton just might be this one. This is the park's Prince of Wales Hotel in a magnificent setting. Goat Haunt is a remote outpost that may be unmanned due to budget cuts. It's located back in the U.S. on the other side of the lake, so you'll have to take a boat to get there. And it's not free. This is where the Continental Divide Trail ends. But there are also some shortish trails here, and they don't have a lot of up. But remember, you need to finish them in time to get back to take the last boat back to Waterton. So let's review the North Fork area. It's pretty remote, it's not very visited, but there's not a lot of parking here either. To get to the lakes, you're going to have to go through narrow gravel roads that are a bit rough. So campers and trailers are not recommended. The trails here are generally pretty flat around the lake, and it's the lowest altitude in the park. But if you want to go up and see the lakes from above, well, the North Fork area can take care of that for you too. Now that I've shown you the primary hiking areas in Glacier, it's time to talk about its companion park north of the border. This park feels European. The first thing you see when you drive in is the Swiss-style Prince of Wales Hotel and its incredible Upper Waterton Lake backdrop. If you're ever in the mood for an afternoon high tea, check out its lobby. There are several trails in the area, but the Parks Canada website makes it hard to find out where they are. The first page has info about Banff and other parks, but you have to click the Things to Do page and scroll down past locations of places to sit to the All Activities list. Then, with the help of reading glasses, look under the Dog Walking link to find the hiking link. It's here that you'll find the only map, and this is it. It's useless. There are a few more links further down. There is a list of short hikes with descriptions, but it's amazing how little information there is for such a great hiking area. National Geographic recently named a day hike here one of the most thrilling hikes in the world. And where do you find info about it? It's under day hikes, where it can easily be lost amongst all the others. Oh, here it is, Crypt Lake. Come on, Canada, step it up a bit. Canada's parks are profit centers, and there's not much money in hiking. Luckily, the large U.S. Glacier PDF map includes many trails in Waterton Lakes, including the thrilling Crypt Lake Trail. Sadly, I haven't done it, because years ago I was told not to hike it alone, so I kind of forgot about it. But now it's so popular, that's not a problem. The Crypt Lake Trail is not for everyone. It's a bit rugged, steep, and potentially dangerous. There's even a tiny tunnel. In other words, it's wonderful. But since its recent designation, it's also often crowded. It's 10.8 miles long, and it goes up 2,300 feet. The trailhead is at the midpoint of Upper Waterton Lake. You get there by boat. The Waterton town site is quaint, with plenty of places to spend your money. And there's also a small harbor, where the Waterton Shoreline Cruise Company is based. I've taken one of their cruises, and I even saw a bear from the boat. Today, a big part of their business is taking hikers to the Crypt Lake Trailhead. Obviously, space is limited, so you might want to get your tickets in advance and hope that you picked a good weather day. If you're a fast hiker, you might want to put some space between you and the crowd in the first 4.5 miles. After that, you'll be single file. A half-mile past an old campground, the trail goes up a narrow ledge and ends at a sheer cliff. On the way, check out the 600-foot waterfall. When it gets really tricky, there's a welcome handrail. At the cliff face, an 8-foot stepladder provides access to a 60-foot natural tunnel that's too small to stand up in. This is a popular selfie spot, so there might be a bit of a delay here. Then there's a stroll down to the lake. And this is Crip Lake. It's a pleasant place to rest after this amazing crossing, while thinking about how lucky you are to be able to hike back on this thrilling trail one more time. So, how do you get here? Well, Waterton Lakes is about an hour's drive from St. Mary via the Chief Mountain Highway. That means it's 3 to 4 hours from Apgar on the west side. The border crossing is not open 24 hours a day, so late-night crossings require an even longer drive. And the road is closed in winter. Yes, Glacier's Companion Park is a bit out of the way. But if you have the time, it's well worth a trip, even if you don't do one of the most thrilling hikes in the world. But if you do the trail, keep in mind that this level of activity is not for everyone. You need to be in good shape before you get here. Medical services are quite limited, and you're at least a couple of hours away from a major hospital. And also remember that this park belongs to nature. We are the intruding visitors. Let's talk about trip planning. A plan is important, but keep in mind that Glacier is not a theme park. Nature's plans may not coincide with yours. So first, plan for flexibility. Bear activity can close trails and campgrounds. Weather is unpredictable and can change quickly in the mountains. Forest fires can utterly ruin your plans. In recent years, my annual trip has been canceled twice because much of the park was on fire. And smoke from fires, even if they're hundreds of miles away, can make hiking and even breathing difficult, and for some, dangerous. So when planning a week to 10-day trip, I plan for at least one bad weather day. Your plans will also depend on if you're staying on the east or west side. Remember, it takes 2 to 3 hours to cross the park on the Sun Road. Keep in mind that those who are in really good shape have many more options when it comes to doing trails. I prefer 9 to 10-day trips, but most people stay for less than a week. So the itinerary I'm about to describe is for a 7-day stay. Let's say you arrive in the afternoon. So on day 1, get to know the area. Read over the park info they give you when you enter the park. And ask a ranger or hotel staff if any of the trails are closed. Ask where there have been wildlife sightings. And ask about this year's road construction. It's almost always going on the Sun Road. But in 2020 and 2021, there's going to be significant road construction on the Mini Glacier Road. And it's expected to cause very long delays. Then explore your local area. Ask other visitors what they've done that they really enjoy. And take a short walk or hike just to see how the altitude is affecting you. Remember, the east side elevation is about 5,000 feet, and that's about 2,000 feet higher than it is on the west side near Lake McDonald. For dinner, or perhaps after dinner, visit one of the park's historic hotels, even if you're not staying at home. Many areas have ranger talks each night near a campground or in a hotel ballroom. In Mini Glacier, the ranger sets up a spotting scope in the Swift Current parking lot each evening. You may not be lucky enough to see a bear, but there's almost always something on one of the mountain ridges. And of course, you don't have to do all of these things on the first night. You've got 6 more. Whatever you do, don't just hang around in your room. It's far too beautiful out here. Rooms are for sleeping and writing in your journal. That's how I get the base material for these scripts. Unless I get to the park really early on day 1, I use my first full day in the park, day 2, to get used to the altitude and maybe do a short hike, but most importantly, that's the day I take a bunch of pictures. Drive to Going to the Sun Road, or take a bus tour to another area of the park that you haven't seen. It takes 2 to 3 hours to drive the 50-ish mile Going to the Sun Road. And if you're lucky enough to get a parking place at Logan Pass, stop and look around. You never know what you might see or photograph. But please remember, these are wild animals. don't try to take a selfie with them. If you feel up to it, take an hour or so to hike out to my favorite lunch spot, with its great view of Heaven's Peak and the valley below. On the Sun Road, when you come to Sunriff Gorge, stop and take a look at the gorge, and maybe walk down to Bering Falls. It's not far. And don't miss one of my favorite photo ops in the park, Wild Goose Island Viewpoint. It's just a few steps from the Sun Road. Glacier is a great place for photographers and Instagrammers. And of course, remember that the east side of the park is lit by the sun in the morning, and the west side of the park is lit in the afternoon. And also remember, there is no phone service in most of the park. So instead of just taking a selfie, why not take something that's suitable for framing? By day 3, it's time to take a real hike, one of my must-do hikes. For first-time visitors who are physically fit, here is a list of my must-do hikes. Number 1, and my favorite hike in Glacier National Park, it's the Grinnell Glacier Trail. This is one of the few trails where you can actually walk up to a glacier. Number 2 on my list is the Highline Trail, from Logan Pass and connecting with the Swift Current Pass Trail all the way to Many Glacier. Now number 3 is a tie, so I'm kind of cheating here. The Tarbagan Tunnel, Saya Pass, or Crip Lake are all very nice hikes. And they're also a little bit more difficult. But there's also an easy one on my list, number 4, Bullhead Lake. So on day 3, if it's open, I suggest you do the Grinnell Glacier Trail first. It's my favorite hike and it's not too difficult. It takes me 2.5 to 3 hours of hard hiking to get up there, but I'm taking photos and videos at many of the beautiful spots along the way. And remember, this one is 3 miles shorter when you take the boat. For many, this is a tough day, but it's one you will never forget. Day 4. If you're tired and sore, maybe with a blister or two, you may want a day that doesn't have quite as much up as the Grinnell Glacier Trail. So the Highline Trail, which is up to 15.2 miles long, might be a good option for you, because it has only about 800 feet of up when you go all the way down the Swift Current. The 15.2 mile version from Logan Pass to Many Glacier, well, it takes me about 8 hours. Now if that's too much for you, consider just going down to the Loop. That's only 12 miles long, and it has only 330 feet of up, but you'll need the hiker shuttle to get back to Logan Pass. Both routes go down about 2,300 feet, and remember that hiking poles make descending much easier on the knees. If either of those routes are just too long for you, consider just taking the 2 to 3 hours to go out to my lunch spot and back. It's a great hike, and because it doesn't take that much time, you can do another trail, like Hidden Lake. Okay, now we're at day 5. After 2 relatively hard days, I plan for an easy one, and Bullhead Lake is perfect. It's an 8-mile round trip that feels relatively flat. They say it goes up and down about 400 feet, but really you can't tell. Day 6. Well, since yesterday was a pretty easy day, it's time for another tough hike. So this would be one of my number 3s, the Tarbagan Tunnel, Saya Pass, or Crip Lake. Any of these trails will make for a very memorable last day, but these hikes should only be done by people who are in really pretty darn good shape, because these are pretty tough. If that doesn't include you, well, consider doing one of my second-tier hikes, like Iceberg Lake. On day 7, getaway day, get up before the sun to see Glacier at daybreak. I do this nearly every day to capture images and get time-lapse sunrises. Glacier looks incredible at dawn, and everyone should experience this at least once when they come to Glacier. If I don't have to leave until midday, I'll also try to do a short hike before I leave. The Falls hike from the Sun Road, the Trail of the Cedars on the west side, or maybe even a jaunt out to my lunch spot if I have to cross through the park. Basically, take in as much as possible. You may have noticed that I haven't said too much about nighttime activities. Well, as I said, nights are for sleeping and for taking notes. But I know that that's not for everyone. Most of the park's hotels have entertainment at night, and I mentioned the Ranger Talks. Hotels also offer fine dining and a bar, and the bars, unlike your room, have a TV. Regrettably, to me, kids can play online video games in the lobby at night, while the rest of us take in the incredible ambience of the place. If you're a young couple, remember that the walls in these old hotels are very thin. Even in the dark, Glacier is amazing. This is a great place for stargazing, especially when there's a new moon. The altitude and clear sky means a city dweller will see more stars than they've ever seen before. You can't do all the great trails in the park on one trip, and any trail may be closed for any number of reasons. So here's a list of my top tier hikes. First, of course, is the Grinnell Glacier Trail. The Trail of the Cedars is number 2, followed by the Highline Trail, and that means just about any version of it, including my lunch spot. The Tarbingen Tunnel, Saya Pass, Bullhead Lake, Crypt Lake, and St. Mary's Falls are all hikes that you should do at least once. But if any of those trails are closed, or if some of them are just too hard for you, these trails are on my second tier of great hikes. Iceberg Lake, Grinnell Lake, Huygen Pass, Swift Current Pass, Dawson Pass, Virginia Falls, Hidden Lake, Avalanche Lake, Abercrombie Falls, Fisher Cap Lake to see the moose, and Sperry Chalet. There are likely plenty of other nice trails out there that I haven't done, and I hope that you'll tell me about them in the comments. So what do you do if the weather is bad? Well, first, come prepared. Bring Gore-Tex versions of everything from shoes to hat and gloves, and hike anyway. On one of my first trips to the park, I spent several hours on one rainy day just hanging out in the Many Glacier Hotel. The ever-changing view out the large-scale windows, and the warmth and smells of the fireplace made for a remarkably pleasant day. Well, for several hours anyway. And remember, the weather can be quite different on either side of the park. If it's raining on the side you're on, check with a ranger or hotel staff to see where it might not be raining. On more than one occasion, I've just driven to another area and done hikes over there. Forest fires are a bigger problem. I canceled a couple of my recent annual trips because of large fires late in the season. Fire smoke, even from distant fires, can make hiking difficult and even dangerous. Bear activity can also cause trails and campgrounds to be closed. Remember, this is not a theme park. Mother Nature is not your mom. And like your mom, she has no favorites. But nature isn't the only thing that can hurt your trip. Glacier has become a victim of its own success. Crowds have made travel, and especially parking, a big problem. And you can see the parking lot status on the website. And remember, you can also find road status information on the website. Too many cars can cause rangers to close road access to popular areas of the park, including Many Glacier. I think the best way to combat overcrowding is to start early, but not in the dark. By the way, bears and other animals like to drink in the lakes and streams early in the morning, so be alert and be careful. For many, Glacier is a once-in-a-lifetime trip. But for me and countless others, we keep coming back because you just can't do all these trails in 1 week. I hope this video helps you plan your trip. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and maybe write a comment. I read every single one of them, and they're quite helpful when the time comes to update the video. To see future updates and dozens of other travel videos, subscribe to this channel. And for the more philanthropic of you, why not contribute to this channel? Even if you watch the ads, we only get about a half a penny for each view. And that won't even cover the cost of travel, let alone the cost of equipment and writing and editing time. And if you're looking for more information on Glacier, don't forget I have another 90-minute documentary called Glacier, the Hikers National Park. It's also available on my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and come on out to Glacier, my favorite national park. And I think you'll agree, this place is special.